So to use Flexbox, you need to have a parent element. Here, we decided to add a container class to this div. And inside this div, there are 5 elements that are considered to be children of this parent element, simply because they are inside the opening and closing bracket of this div with a class of container. For the moment, there's no Flexbox involved at all. This is just regular CSS. So we created this custom class. So you can see there is this dot, meaning that this is a custom class matching this class. There is nothing special about container. We could have named it pizza or whatever you want. We just decided to name it container because it makes sense, as this one is considered a container of these 5 children. If you want this container to use Flexbox, you simply have to use the display property and give it a value of flex. And immediately what you can see is that all the children elements are displayed horizontally from left to right. And this now is the main axis. It goes from left to right. So now, as it's a flex element, what you can do, you can simply justify this element using justify content. And there you can see all the properties you can use. Let's go for center. So now you can see all your elements are centered. If you want this one to be aligned on the right, you simply use flex end. And flex start is the default. But what makes it even more interesting is that you can space the items simply by using space between. You can see this is responsive, so you don't have to make complex calculations. And if you prefer having a space that is evenly distributed, you just have to use space evenly, and the last one space around. And there you can see here you have half of the width that you have between the items, half of the width here, half of the width here. So you can immediately see that it will make creating menus items, for example, you could add links in there way easier. We'll see at the end of the video how we could also center every digit. So we saw that this is the main axis. So by default, the flex direction was row. So if we add display direction of row, nothing changes, which means that you could use another display direction and then it would go from top to bottom, which means that the main axis would go from top to bottom. So it's very easily done simply by changing this property. But let's go back to the flex direction of row, because now we saw that justify contents acts on the main axis here from left to right, but we can also align things on the cross axis. Why is it named cross axis? Because it's a 90-degree angle with the main axis. So the cross axis goes from top to bottom, which means if you want to align things vertically, you just have to use align items, and then again you can use either flex start, which is equivalent to what we have. You can use center, or you can use flex end, which means that if you want to perfectly center something, you just have to use align items center, so to align things vertically, and justify content center. So if you had just one single item, this is all it would take to align it perfectly to the center. Let's go back to flex start and see what would happen if you had more than just 5 elements. Now all these elements try to stay on the same row, so their width decreased. But if you want to keep the same width and you want all these elements to use a new line when they don't have enough room, simply use another very useful property, which is flex wrap. And now we can use wrap. So you can see that when the element doesn't have enough room, it just goes to the next line. And if we go back to a flex start here, it would start on the top left corner. Now that you have several lines, maybe you would like these lines to be close to one another. So let's say you don't want to have this space between all these lines. You can use align content, flex start, or flex end, or center. So let's go back to just 5 items as we had at the beginning of the video. Very often, especially with menus, you will want to have space between, let's say for example, the 4th and 5th element, maybe because inside there would be a link to connect to your account or to create a new account. You can select this. Is extremely useful. It's something that you will use very often. Let's say you want to pick the 5th item. You just have to use the nth child, pass it the number, the position of the element, so it's the 5th element, so you just go for 5. And to make sure it worked, let's just change the border so it becomes green. Now you can see the 5th element has a green border. I often use this trick. I add borders around items I want to play with. And now, if you want this element to be aligned on the right, you can use a margin left of auto. Why is it margin left? Simply because you see this element now has a margin on its left. So it's kind of counterintuitive to think of the left when you want the item to go to the right. And this is something you will use very often, especially in the context of menus. And maybe sometimes you want these elements to go to the bottom. Maybe you want to have a card with a button on the right. There you could use align self. And remember that align has an influence on the cross axis. And you could ask to go to the flex end. So now your element was there. This is super convenient, and this is usually what is super frustrating when you play with flex at first. And now I told you that we will see how to center also an element inside an item. Remember that these items are child elements of this parent that has a display of flex, but every item can also become a parent of its own children. Here the children will be just the number 1. So you can take an item and make it also a flex container by using display flex. And now you can use justify content as the main axis goes from left to right of center. You see now they're on the center, and the cross axis goes from top to bottom. So you can use align items also center. And now you can see all your elements are centered. We used Flexbox to organize items either horizontally or vertically. If you want to be very specific on the 2 dimensions, that means you'd rather use the grids. And this is what we're going to see in the next video.